posted on our website, and maybe the transcript will work. I know I held one at the North Shore Hall in September, sort of as we were preparing the budget, and it transcribed it into French. So unfortunately, that wasn't very effective. But we'll see if we got that bug sorted out. Technology is always kind of fun. Hybrid presentations are a little bit new for us, so I'll be mostly addressing the folks that are in the room, but people have joined online. Jillian, do you know how many people are online yet?
We have no one joining us online as of now, maybe in a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to start going. So my name is Scott Spencer. I'm the general manager for Nelson Hydro, and I'm joined today by Nathan Russ, who is a finance officer for the city of Nelson, and helps me sort out all the books and the finances and preparing our budgets and our rate applications for the BC Utilities Commission. Yeah, and online I have Jillian Mackay, who's a utility support analyst with Nelson Hydro, and she's going to moderate any questions that come from anybody who joins us online and advance the slides. So if you hear me say slide, she's gonna flip that so that Nathan and I can just focus on the presentation and what you're doing here. So some logistics. There are washrooms right here, exits where you came out. These ones here are also exits. If there is an emergency, we will all just proceed out. All those good, important sort of things about attending meetings today. Thank you so much for attending. For those who arrived late, we do have some hot apple cider and some chocolatey treats there, as well as some swag if you would like a City of Nelson Hydro hat or toque. Please help yourself when you're leaving.
I think you said it's cards.
What's that?
I think you said it's cards.
We haven't spiked it yet, but we'll see how it goes. So to start us off, I would like to acknowledge that the land in which we gather is the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa, Syilx, and Snaax peoples, and is the home of Métis and many diverse Aboriginal persons. And we honor their connection to the land and rivers and respect the importance of the environment and our strength as a community. Hey, Jillian, let's start into what the plan is for today. So in terms of meeting management, Nathan and I are going to take turns presenting. Mostly Nathan's going to talk about the financial stuff, and then I'll cover all the rest of the business plan, sort of how we're going to be operating. That kind of supports that. We used to do all that first and then talk about the finances and the budget rates at the end, but we found that people are really most interested in how much it costs. And then I'll tell you that why we think that that rate needs to go up with all of the rest of the details. So that's kind of how we're going to walk our way through here. I'm a fan of just asking questions as they come up. So if I've spoke to a slide before I move on to the next slide, shoot your hand up or just yell out. Jillian, same, just call out if you've got a question either in the chat or someone's got their hand raised, and we'll try and address them. If it starts to get a little bit bogged down, we may have to kind of move along. We've got about an hour sort of material for the slides. If we stop for questions, it'll take longer, but if we answer everybody's questions during the presentation, and the Q&A at the end is much shorter. So we've allocated a couple of hours to spend this afternoon. So at any time you need to get up, use the washroom, grab a snack, feel free to do so. I think the chocolate kind of give you a bit of an energy boost if you're starting to get bogged down by all the numbers and the details. Forgive us if we talk utility speak or accounting. If you don't understand a term or an item, please just let us know and we will explain. Sometimes we forget and use acronyms or things like that that may not be common knowledge to everybody. And there is no such thing as a bad question, just the ones that you don't ask. So please, this is all about getting the information you need to understand about Nelson Hydro. We talked a little bit about the history already. I'm happy to go into more details and that sort of, maybe later on, once we've kind of got the big questions, but, yeah, it's a great utility. It's really nice to have this, locally. We're different from, anywhere else. There's only three, vertically integrated utilities. So like transmission, generation and distribution in the province of British Columbia. That's BC Hydro, Fortis BC and Nelson Hydro. There are four other municipally owned utilities. That's Summerland, Penticton, Grand Forks and New Westminster that operate their own utility, but they only have distribution within their municipal boundaries. So we're the only ones that are charged with serving not only the residents of Nelson, but also outside of our municipal boundaries. And because of that, that means that we are governed by the BC Utilities Commission for rural rates. So given that we're in Balfour, I suspect that many of you here, if not most, are rural ratepayers. I'm a rural ratepayer. So is Nathan. Our communities are all integrated. We're all consider ourselves Nelson around here. So it's sort of, this is kind of the rate base, but the Utilities Commission looks at it very differently from residents of the city of Nelson and the rural ratepayer. So if I'm talking about the Utilities Commission, it's because they're the ones that focus on the rural side of our utility. Okay, and we have been serving rural customers since 1922. So that's when, the folks outside of the city of Nelson decided that, hey, we like this newfangled thing called electricity too. Can you service? And West Kootenai Light and Power said, forget it, all the power is going to the mines. We're not bothering with a few, houses sort of, scattered along the North Shore or out in Blewett. So city of Nelson said, okay, we'll do it. Here's the rate it's going to cost you. And that's why we serve the rural utility. And currently serve up to Coffee Creek on this side, and Blewett, all of Blewett, and to Tagum on the south shore, and then up to Cottonwood Lake to the south of Nelson. All right, so Jillian, you had our organization chart up. So just to give you an idea, we are a very lean utility. So we are 19 full-time equivalents. So there's 20 people listed on here, not including the Ray here. So Nathan, works for the city. We do borrow some of his time, as well as Carmen, the EcoSave, Gabe, who's helps with our regulatory, and then Sabina's our administrator. If you've ever been to the city of the city of Nelson complex and public works and Nelson Hydro, Sabina's at the front desk. She'll greet you and answer any questions you have. The rest of the group here, primary group keeps the lights on, lines in operation. So Neil Germany is our operations manager. He's got 6 power line technicians. We've got 2 electricians and a millwright who operate the plant and other electrical chores, substations and the like. We have projects and customer service. Because we're a small utility, we have to kind of combine things. So Casey is a jack of all trades. So he does all the customer sort of facing inquiries. If you ever have a concern, he's the one that it eventually goes to. But he's got a billing clerk, a meter technician, and then our design team. So we've got 3 designers that every time if you call up and say, hey, I want to upgrade my service or I'm building a house here, they're the guys that are going to come out and have a look at your place and come up with a plan and give you an estimate of how much it's going to cost. And then this year, I guess, has it been a year and a half? We added Kevin Donetto as a power systems engineer. He's paid for his salary a couple of times over in the system improvements. You'll probably have noticed a lot of the impacts, not only just from the veg management, but the work that Kevin's doing in looking at our power system and making sure it's operating efficiently, reduced outages significantly. Some of the work that he's done to help us out there. It's also great to have sort of that technical engineering resource in house. So that's the team there. I've also got Jillian, who's on the line there. Jillian keeps us all organized. Hang on, go ahead.
Just wondering, Scott, if you can give a number of how many of the linesman technicians have been reduced since, say, 20 years ago when Nelson Hydro decided to go to contracting it.
I don't have any statistics around that. When I started 4 years ago, we had 5 power line technicians. We added a 6th so that it allowed us to be able to take on more of the larger jobs, because when you've only got 5, you've got, you got to have sort of a response, like the lights go out, someone's got to be able to drop everything and go. If you've only got the 5, if somebody takes vacation or is busy somewhere and you just don't have the ability to assign a 3-person crew to do some of those bigger jobs.
The number that I heard, and this is unsubstantiated, I don't know this fact, but that 20 years ago, there were probably 10 or 11 lines.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, I would think so, that there would have been more then.
And the contracting there.
Yeah. Yeah, we're very lucky to have a couple of really long power line contractors in the area. And what that allows us to do is, get through those peaks and valleys. So if we're doing pole replacements, we could have a crew, but they would be working all through January and February trying to replace poles, which is not ideal and not efficient. Whereas we use contract crews, we can bring them in, do a consolidated effort. They can sort of park on the North Shore and just do pole.
So they need the power.
Yeah, and then they're also available if we have a big storm, which is very helpful. So we can go from, 3 crews with Nelson Hydro during a storm to 12 crews if we bring in both the local contractors, which is was very helpful. So it's sort of it kind of helps those peak periods like outages and major capital projects. It allows us to go. So yeah, but that's a good question. I'm just going to finish up on our thing. So Jillian does all of our analysis and keeps track. She's also managing a bunch of projects for us, including our geographical information system. I'll talk about that in a bit. And then this year we brought on a half-time project coordinator to try and meet all of our commitments, both from a regulatory perspective as well as good project management practices to support the project teams and the things that we've got going on and due diligence. So that's the Nelson Hydro team. I'm going to turn it over to Nathan now, and he's going to talk about budget and rates.
Sure, thanks, Scott. You mentioned there's snacks over there. I saw your name listed about 10 times with mine just listed once, so you might need the energy later.
I'll take
I don't know.
grab your chocolate.
So I'm gonna jump right into it, but first off, just thanks for coming. We value your input, we value your questions, and thanks for taking the time to be interested in the Nelson Hydro budgeting process and the rate discussion. So thank you for coming out. I'm gonna jump right into it. So I have about 6 slides on the budget. The first 2 slides are kind of looking at 2024, so they're not looking at our 2025 rates yet. But the last slides talk more about 2025, but thought I'd throw in a couple slides on 2024 just to show kind of where we are today. And this first slide, I'll walk you through it, but it just compares our 2024 budget versus what we forecast to end the year in. We don't know our final numbers at the end of the year until about April, when our financial statements are audited. So these are just forecasts for now, what our best estimates.
Based on the third quarter, so the end of September.
Yeah. And then just kind of extrapolating trending information to try to project the year end. So how to read this chart on the right. So the dark lines are your budgeted figures for 2024, and the lighter lines are your forecast or projection for 2024. You've got your revenue in green and then your expense lines in blue. So I'll just kind of go over these one by one. So on the revenue side, so we budgeted about 23.7 million in revenue. And we're going to come a little bit short of that, but we're projecting to be within 1% of budget, which is pretty decent. The shortfall is about 300,000. That equates to about 1% what we expect that we will forego. In terms of expenses, power purchase this year, again, within 1%, we're forecasting within 1% of budget. forecasting about $82,000 or $80,000 more than what we budgeted on that power purchase expense side. The main drivers on the power purchases, lower freshet compared to typical year. So our average year of freshet, but we came in a little bit lower than that. So that means that we're not producing as much power throughout the entire year or during that freshet season, really, as we would on an average year. So that means we have to buy a little bit more power from FortisBC because we're not producing that during freshet. So we need to buy a little bit more power from Fortis than we expected originally. And then there was also some higher demand charges than budgeted due to some weather events that happened in 2024. So they're the main drivers why we're forecasting a little bit higher than budget. On the operating or the remainder of the operating expenses, forecasting to be about 3% higher than what we had budgeted. So that equates to about $250,000. The main driver of that is Scott and his team were seeing higher vegetation growth than expected this year. So as a result, to maintain that, to control that, we had to spend a little bit more in vegetation management expenses this year compared to what we had forecasted in our budget. And finally, the last item here on your right, capital expenditures. So we're projecting to spend around $400,000 more in 2024 than we budgeted. There's one major project that contributes to that. That was the Mill Street substation. That was a multi-year project where we're budgeting that in 2021. We started activity in 2022, 2023, 2024. We ran into some small unforeseen costs that we didn't expect, and just inflationary factors crept up a little bit more than we had budgeted for in 2021. But we are expecting to finish within 5% of our original budget for that project. Other major factor is we actually did have an insurance claim that we are receiving for the Mill Street project, and we received less than we originally anticipated as well. So those two combined, those two factors, resulted in us projecting around an 8% increase in forecast expenditures for capital than budgeted. Next slide, Julian. And so what does all that mean? So I mean, we brought in less revenue than anticipated, and we spent a little bit more than we anticipated in 2024. So this kind of illustrates what that means and what mechanisms we have or what levers we can pull to mitigate some of the risks or control some of these variances in our budget between budget and actual. So here's our budget on the left. So, and then our actual forecast on the right. So what we have budgeted is to earn, as I mentioned before, about 23.7 million in revenue. And we had budgeted our O&M, or operating expenses, including power purchases in here, to be about 16.3 million. So that's what we had budgeted. Now, this doesn't include capital expenditures or anything like that. I'm just comparing our excess revenue over operations. So we had budgeted for the difference there about 7.4 million. That's what we were hoping to bring in. But in reality, what we're forecasting is 6.8 million instead. So it's a difference of around $600,000 that we're not going to bring in that we thought we were going to bring in. And so the levers that we have, there was really two, one for rural and one for urban. The rural levers are essentially these variance deferral accounts that BCUC has approved. And we have, I believe, 6 or 7 variance accounts. And what that enables us to do, if the difference between actuals and budget fall within one of these accounts, we can actually recoup in future years that difference. Or if we've over budgeted, we can credit the customers back that difference. So maybe a quick and easy example is a storm deferral account. So for example, if we're budgeting $50,000 into a storm deferral account and we get no storms in a year, we basically overcharged you by $50,000 in the year. So then the deferral account will credit you back that $50,000. It's amortized over 5 years and collects interest, and you get the interest and you'll get that payment back in 5 years. Now, in the other situation where we budgeted $50,000 in a storm reserve or storm account, and we had some big storms and we incurred $100,000 in costs, then the opposite happens. that $50,000 difference, we do collect that back from ratepayers, again, amortized over 5 years. So that's how the variance accounts works. And that's one mechanism where we can recoup some of the differences between what we budgeted for and what our projections are.
Sorry, just two
Yeah.
questions. You did a good job of separating some of your expenses during the previous slide. I haven't really understood the revenue sources that you're talking about. And it would be helpful, I think, if you identify, particularly with our group, whether these are rural revenues or urban revenues, or whether there are other revenues that aren't included in those two categories. Just so we have an understanding of the revenue side of the equation.
Sure, yeah, and I should have pointed out ahead of time, this is as the utility as a whole. In certain situations, I will break out rural and urban. But yeah, correct, this is for the utility as a whole, and that's definitely something I could break out in a future year presentation, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
the second
good point.
question is, how much during an outage is your impact? When does your revenue become impactful in terms of not, maybe it's 4 hours, maybe it's 12 hours? Is there a point where an outage actually causes you guys a revenue issue?
Yeah, that's a good question. I might have to defer to Scott on, I don't know if you have statistics on that. I mean, technically, any outage would have a revenue impact, I would assume, but I don't have any statistics around.
I also,
Yeah.
I think
Okay,
that correlates to that statistic you're asking for.
Perfect.
Nathan is right. Anytime the power is out, yeah, that's impacting our revenue because nobody's buying power. But from an outage perspective, so we track number of minutes of outages annually. And so you'll see in the slide coming up, so we are 99.96% reliable. So like a 4-hour outage is a very, very small percentage of the total number of minutes in a year. If you can, kind of visualize that. So you'll see those statistics. And so when we're talking about reliability, we're talking about, small percentages of 99%, power on. But you experienced them as 16 hours or 20 hours where you didn't have power. And you're like, oh, that's really frustrating. So, that's why we expand the scale of those metrics to be able to get data, because people notice the difference between 99.5 and 99.6.
One additional.
I see it differently. When the power goes out, I actually feel like I'm saving money, just so you know.
I guess it kind of shows the immateriality of that when we're putting the budgets together. We don't even factor that in. It's so minute that it would fall within the realm of, a 0.01% difference between budget and forecast or something to that.
But I do expect your costs are going to be in a reverse higher during an outage period.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
So perhaps you could explain in the budgeting here.
Yeah.
You all know that the city of Nelson takes a grant or an entitlement into their budget for city expenses.
Sure.
Is that a fixed amount every year, or does that amount vary with revenue, and what percentage is it?
The dividend you're talking about to the city of Nelson? Yeah, it does vary from year to year.
Does it reflect how the budget is going?
It
Of
has,
course, it varies, but it's,
yeah,
if you get less money coming in revenue.
Yeah.
Does the city of Nelson get less, or do they get what was budgeted for?
yeah, it's a good question. I don't recall how we calculated that this year. Do you? 'Cause
I
it's,
can help you.
yeah,
there. So the difference there is regulated accounting versus public service accounting. So the city of Nelson, and municipality and governments all have one way of sort of counting things, and utilities typically are governed by regulated accounting. And so the calculation for the return that utility makes on the rates is a process which I'll talk a little bit about in terms of the Utilities Commission, but they determine, because, all the utilities in BC are natural monopolies, so you can't choose to take power from BC Hydro. You can only take it from Nelson Hydro. If you live in Nelson, but if you live in Kitimat, then you can only get it from BC Hydro. So the way that, the Utilities Commission manages that is through a return on equity. And that is a percentage of the amount of investment that a utility has made into the infrastructure. So the amount of, you know, poles and substations and generating stations and all of the hard assets, the value of those, each year it's a percentage of that. So that's how the return for the city is calculated,
Yeah.
for the rural side, and then
Yeah.
for the city side, then it's really, it's the, you know, the city council decides here, like,
That's what I'm asking,
How
on the
much-
city side, how much is the city's amount, because the city isn't controlled by the utilities commission.
yeah.
How much does the city's entitlement vary, or is it a fixed amount every year? If there's less revenue, is there entitlement to city no transfer?
There are two
Yeah.
components to it, and what I was saying, I don't remember the exact calculation or the exact figures of those components. There's a base fixed amount, plus there is an inflationary amount. But I don't recall off the top of my head what those difference in those numbers are.
And of course, that money is subsidized by the rural use.
No, so.
It comes out of the general office.
So to Scott's point, the amount of dividend that the city takes is not in, or sorry, I should reverse that. The rural ratepayers percentage increase or the rates has no bearing on the amount that Nelson takes out as a dividend. They're not correlated, they're not together, it's not the same calculation. As Scott was saying, it's BCUC that dictates how much return on investment of our assets or return on assets that directly corresponds to the rural ratepayer. Nothing to do with the city of Nelson. City of Nelson would just take out $1 dividend or $1 million dividend, rates would not change for rural ratepayers.
And those of you who were around for previous years, presentations, you remember me talking about the cost of service process that we were going through, was to determine how we split the rural and the urban rate, because we do have common costs, like my salary is, I'm serving both urban and rural, so how does that get costed out? So that whole proceeding, which took 2.5 years with the Utilities Commission, was about coming up with the way we calculate the costs that rural pay and the costs that the city pays, and then when you look only at the rural, then there's a return on the equity that's allocated to the rural side of the utility that goes into that return to the city for their investment into the utility.
Does that include, in that royalty, because it's from the flow of run of river that goes to the power plant? And that converts to cash that gets paid, or dollars that get paid to the city. Does that include operating costs for that flow of river that goes through the plant?
Yeah, the cost of service is all part of, all the costs are looked at, so. And one of the things that the Utilities Commission determined was that the cost and revenue, power generated from the power plant is to be split, urban and rural on the same percentage as the other expenses.
Yeah, so that's common.
Yeah, exactly, that's the common cost, yeah.
What I'm asking is, the run of river volume that is the royalty, or I'm using that term royalty, but it's the payment, the dividend payment. That's net of operating costs to generate those dollars? That's the
Like,
question.
with the water license transfer
Yes,
amount,
yes.
that is not net of operating, that's just straight, the amount of water or power that we generate from 263 cubic feet per second. That's was granted to the city of Nelson through the arbitration and
Yes.
in the agreement with BC Hydro. So they take that 265 cubic feet per second, and it's whatever our generating plant produces in kilowatt hours. And then there's a then you just multiply it by the rate that the wholesale power rate. So Fortis BC tariff 41 wholesale power rate. The rate that we buy power from Fortis BC is the rate that the city gets for the power that's generated based on that water allocation.
So I understand the mechanism. I'm just wondering, because the plant has to run and it has costs. And is it just gratis to the city to produce that power? Or is there an operating cost that gets netted off of that and they get the balance?
Well, it would be based on the price for generation. So like when we buy power from Fortis BC.
Yeah.
It's net of whatever their costs are because this is their commercial. So we just for simplicity, we just use the Fortis BC rate for what the city gets.
I'm still not clear on that, and because I know when you generate the power out of the plant, there's an operating cost that goes associated with it. So there's a gross number and then there's a net number of operating.
Yep.
But the dividend payment, because I've looked through the document, it's not clear to me. It may be there, but it's not clear in my mind how exactly that works.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a better way I can explain it, but retail power goes for 13 cents a kilowatt hour.
Right.
We buy it wholesale at say 5.4 cents a kilowatt hour from Fortis BC today price.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're talking about, sort of like that difference is sort of like, in the retail rate is, to account for, all the operating costs and things that it costs to actually run the utility. So I don't know if that sort of like helps to try and.
Yeah, I understand how the pricing kind of works and, with the Fortis rate.
Yeah. I'm
just wondering the actual, because it is generated through the Nelson Hydro plant.
Yeah.
And then the pricing is based on the formula.
Schedule 41.
Schedule 41.
The Fortis BC there.
Yeah, but to me, the plant doesn't run by itself. It's not free. It does have a cost. I'm just wondering how that actually gets accounted for. Because operating costs are going up, the amount of time because to do the 265 cubic feet a second requires some plant time. And I'm just wondering if that operations comes off the city's number, or is it just free of charge and they just get the net price through
It's getting a wholesale rate. Yeah, it's getting a wholesale rate. So, the cost to actually generate that amount of power would be less because we know that our generation is cheaper than the cost of power purchase. That's why we're able to have lower rates than Fortis BC is because we can offset the power purchases. Otherwise, we would just be marking power up and passing it on, which is what Penticton and Summerland do. So their rates are always higher or close to or higher than Fortis BC's rates because they're just passing those costs through. Whereas we're generating at a lower cost and we're able to offset the power purchases with it. That's why the revenue and power purchases are so important for the fresh air.
But the Nelson dividend isn't subject to that, really. I mean, that 265 cubic feet a second just goes straight through.
At the wholesale rate.
At the wholesale rate. So the wholesale rate, you're telling me then takes into account the operating costs?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure I quite fully understand that numbers accounted for, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, that first way to recoup or credit back, that mechanism for rural ratepayers, that those various for the city on the urban side is managed through the reserve balance. So essentially, if we, don't make sufficient money to here for capital investments on the urban side, we'll just see basically draw money out of the reserves and the following year or the following years increase rates for urban to put money back in the reserves. So we manage it differently in the city through the reserve balances. I do have a slide at the end which kind of shows the reserve balances and it shows the ebbs and flows. So that will be, I can illustrate that a little bit better visually on one of my subsequent slides. Next slide, please, Jillian. I'll kind of hurry through this one. So on the left-hand side is, so now we're jumping into 2025. So the last two slides, we're kind of looking at 2024 and our performance based against budget. Now we're kind of jumping into 2025, looking for an operating budget and rates. So we'll kind of jump through this one quickly because I think I have some better slides talking about it. But this was just to show the distribution of operating costs and the distribution of capital in various buckets here. I'll let you kind of look at this on your own, but one thing I did want to point out on your operating side are those power purchase costs and how significant they are. So we're projecting in 2025 or budgeting in 2025 just short of $9 million in power purchase costs from Fortis BC, which is about 55% of the whole operating budget for Nelson Hydro. So, and obviously we don't control what those rates are. Once we learn the rates from Fortis BC, we enter that in the budget and we pass those costs along. On the right-hand side, out of the $4.1 million, I realize that I'm on figures here, you have to do the math, about $4.1 million capital expenditures that we're planning to do in 2025. And again, this just shows the different buckets that those pertain to: power plant, capital, pole and distribution capital. And I have an other capital, there's GIS in there, transmission line, line meters, stations, and whatnot, or is next slide, please, Joe. Okay, so here's similar to the slide that I showed before, but now we're talking about comparing 2024 budget compared to 2025 budget. So your 2024 budget is on the left, so in the darker columns, and then your 2025 is in your lighter columns. And I'll just show the differences between 2024 and what we're budgeting for 2025. I'll leave revenue till the end. I'll kind of start with the expenses here. Power purchases. So we're expecting an increase in power purchase costs of about $655,000, which is about 8%. Probably will be closer to 9% from Fortis BC, essentially. So the main drivers are a rate increase from Fortis BC, and we just found out today that that's 5.65%.
Oh, you changed it.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I didn't change it. Somebody must change it.
Okay.
These numbers were based on a 5.3% rate increase. But we just found out today, the CCUC approved a 5.65% interim rate increase for Fortis BC. So this number will go up slightly. That's why I said it'll probably be closer to 9%. But in any regard, about $700,000 increase in power purchase costs between 2024 and 2025. Our operating expenditures, aside from power purchases or other operating expenditures, we're actually leaving about flat from this year to last year, actually a decrease of about $35,000. And the main driver for that is not every year in terms of maintenance is exactly the same for Nelson Hydro. We just have a little bit less scheduled maintenance this year compared to 2024. So that's how we're able to decrease the budget slightly from the operating. On the capital side, this last column here, again, a decrease in capital expenditures in 2025 compared to 2024. Now with capital, they do vary quite a bit from year to year. It's not like operations that stay relatively stable. For capital, it really just depends on what your capital projects are for the year or your capital investment is for the year. So one of the big capital expenditures for 2024 that we will not have in 2025 is that Mill Street substation, the one I spoke about before, which was that multi-year project. So that's concluding at the end of 2024 here, or the beginning of 2025. So we won't have those capital costs in 2025. And then the revenue side. So given all this information, increasing power purchase costs, also, we had an increase in our asset base, and that was predominantly from Mill Street. So now we've brought Mill Street substation online. So the value of our assets have gone up about 9% compared to 2024. So given all this information, we enter all this information into the COSA model. The total revenue that we required over last year is about 7%. So 2024 compared to 2025, difference is about 1.7 million or 7%.
Well, on your capital project, my experience as a telco, I couldn't ask for capital without getting an ROI that was somewhat going to increase the efficiency of the organization or somehow return, getting more customers or something. Do you spend a lot of time on your capital calculations of getting, does it all need to be approved? And then what are your criteria for approving it as it makes a rate of return or a rate of investment, or return on investment?
Yeah.
Might let you speak to that.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So unlike sort of like a for-profit company that's sort of like looking at sort of, that return on investment calculation, as a utility, we're trying to make sure that we have, the service levels and the reliability that, industry standard and certainly the Utilities Commission keeps an eye on those things and, directs us to make investments if they're seeing drops in that service quality, like reliability, things like that. So, we're investing, for the long-term health and benefit of the utility. And the Utilities Commission is looking for the value to the ratepayers as a result of that, whether it's a reduction in rates or a improvement in reliability or maintaining service levels. So a lot of what we're doing is replacing aging infrastructure. Just as, Mill Street was 40 years old and it was at the end of life, we had a failure among transformers that accelerated the program. So that's how those business cases are put together. They're based on value, not necessarily a strict return on investment, and certainly not like a private company, Castlegar, like, we're gonna have to rock a 3-year payback because they don't know if they're gonna be operating in 3 years. So they want to make sure every investment, pays for itself within a very short period of time. We're looking at longer cycles as a utility because we've got longer, we have that, assurance through sort of, the natural monopoly that we have, that we're gonna be continuing to provide that service. We're not gonna get, strand the assets and not be able to regain the value of those over a longer term investment. Yeah, Josh.
Many years ago, when I put power into my place, I think the full cost was $7,000. Without 4 years or plus ago. Now we're looking at putting Nelson power into another property we have, and it's like $190,000 to do that. So it's a big issue. Question I have is, once that's paid for by me, does the city of Nelson, does that become part of their asset? And do they get a return on my investment?
Does that go into the tangible capital assets? That's a good question. We certainly, then maintain it for the rest of its life. So we take that on when we do that.
Yeah, it would go in the TCA. I mean,
Okay.
if it's, I don't know how that works. If we're maintaining it, it would be on the TCA.
You maintain it, but you also make income.
We also which?
Make income.
Yeah.
Yeah, electricity. Yeah, for sure.
So I see a lot of development around this community, and I just find it difficult. If the city of Nelson is making a rate of return on our investments, that's not our, it's not just personal. I mean, it's a subdivision or not development road. What did that cost that gentleman to put that in? And as the city of Nelson, I'm making that return because I'd much rather see that return come to the road or create a discount for us.
Now, I haven't been asked that question before. Certainly $100,000 sort of service extension is not that common. There tend to be smaller than that, but it does add up. I think we budget. There's about $200,000.
Yeah.
North Shore,
Yeah.
South Shore, and the city sort of each sort of roughly.
Yeah, city's a bit less, I
So
think.
maybe
but-
$500,000 or a bit more.
Could you get back to me on whether or not the city?
Yeah, I can look into
makes
that.
the return on the equity of the investment of other individuals.
Yeah, I can look into that and how that revenue on Nelson Hydro's point of view, because you're paying Nelson Hydro and how that plays in. Yeah, I can look into that. It's a good question. Next slide, Jillian. And then, so given, as the last slide showed, we need to raise revenue by 7%. This is what the impact are on rate. So here we've divided this slide between the top section, which is the rural rate proposed increase, and then the urban rate increase on the bottom. And so I'm gonna explain how to read this chart. I'm not a huge fan of waterfall charts, but they can be useful. So here are the components. So let's just look at the rural rate increase at the top. Here are the different components that make up that rate. And so if you add up all these 3.04, 2.88, 1.37, then it equals that 7.54%. So return on capital, so that's what we were kind of talking about before with, Mill Street is a great example. Now our asset value is worth quite a bit more, 9% more than it was the previous year. And so the COSA model indicates that we need a return on equity. And so this is that return on equity portion or return on capital. So 3% of the 7% rate increase is because we have a larger asset base than we did in previous years. The next is the power purchases. So again, that's Fortis BC, where we buy power from. 2.88% of the 7.5% is a result of just rate increases from Fortis BC and more power purchases. And then finally, the deferral account. So those were what we were talking about before for when I use the storm reserve as an example, or the storm deferral account. These are for prior year deferral accounts. Makes up 1.3% of the 7%. And then finally, I just put other, it's significant, 0.2%. So that's your O&M and just other small costs. On this urban side or the city side, we don't have a return on capital because that's a BCU decision the BCUC decision, and the BCUC is not involved in the city. Instead, we use the capital reserve. And so this would be contributions to capital reserve of the 5% increase for urban. Just under 2% of that is because we need to contribute more to the capital reserve. Power purchases make up about 2.8% of that 5%. And then again, just other and whatnot at 0.3%.
What's power purchase different between rural and urban as it relates to, I thought you guys indicated that it was just a Fortis price.
Mm-hmm.
What creates the difference from a percentage here? This
would be calculated based on different demand, like urban versus rural demand for power. But also this is the percentage of this rate here. So if the impact on rural is a little bit higher, maybe there's more demand in that year, or sorry, more demand for power purchases.
The way you said that, it just sounded to me like you're allocating more of the costs associated with the purchase to the rural than you are to the urban.
No, it would be demand based in the COSA model. It wouldn't be just a more like an arbitrary allocation. We're allocating more to rural just because we can, it's based on demand. Yeah.
The COSA model goes through all sorts of calculations in terms of like, the amount of energy that's purchased, the amount of the demand, like the peak that's also purchased, and then a bunch of other factors. So, it's not as straightforward as maybe this simple chart you can reflect, but it's what the utilities commission has, directed us to use in their calculate. So it just becomes like that. That's how it run.
Do you have like a 5-year plan, like this going to continue, like 26, 27, 28? Do you see the rate continue to go up?
It does depend. I don't have a slide on a future plan aside from the city. Yeah. It is likely, with inflation and with some other factors and with replacing capital equipment, it is very likely that rates would increase, but no, we don't have a 5-year plan, indicating what the rate increases would be year after year. That is something we are working towards, though. We've kind of discussed that internally, just having that information ahead of time. would be valuable. So it is something that we're gonna look at. Now, things will change, but just to give a ballpark for sure, yeah. We do on the cities, the next slide, actually, if we skip to the next slide, Jillian, you know, on the urban side, we do forecast, again, we don't calculate rates, but we do forecast out a little bit more in regards to reserve balances. So that's kind of indicated by this yellow line here. So just to explain this graph a little bit, this is the Nelson Hydro Capital Reserve. Our target area to maintain the reserve within is between the 4 million and 9 million. So that's this horizontal line and the top horizontal line. And the yellow line indicates the reserve balance, and that's where we have some projections going out forward for the reserve balance. We're projecting to dip slightly below that $4 million mark in the capital reserve in 2024. So that means the urban ratepayers need to contribute more to the capital reserve than they were the prior year to keep that within the zone. And then we forecast out what it's gonna look like 5-10 years down the reserve, or 10 years down the road for the reserve. But yeah, we don't have rates necessarily associated with that. It's a good point.
There's any downtime, yeah, in regards to BC and Nelson Hydro.
Yeah, there is debt, actually, the debt is actually the bottom portion of this graph, so it's pointed down. So 2023, just under 4 million. And we are anticipating taking out more debt in 2025, about $2 million worth of debt in 2025 to be just over $5 million in debt.
Is that going through MFA?
Yes, it is.
So the city of Nelson can't borrow money through MFA, only the region district can.
Correct.
So it's basically like we're co-signing your loan. If you can't get it by yourself.
Correct. That's the way the rules are. Yeah.
And we share in any reduction. So as an example, the reason we go to MFA, because it's cheaper than going to the private sector or for the city of Nelson to go down their own for bonds or whatever it might be.
Correct.
So do we share in any of that benefit?
Yeah. Yeah, you do. So I don't know if do you want to talk about the difference between the deemed debt versus, or do you want me to kind of take a stab at that?
I can, or no, you go ahead.
Yeah, so it's a bit complex, but the way that BCUC governs the rural ratepayer is allowing the city of Nelson to get a return on equity, as we spoke about before. When we have lots of assets, the city of Nelson can earn a return on those assets. But the BCUC said, okay, but you can't earn a full return on all of the assets because a typical utility might have more debt and less equity. And so the BCUC has said, we'll allow you to take equity, your full equity amount on our assets only at 50% of your asset value. The remainder, the remaining 50% is based on an assumption that we have debt for that remaining 50%. So that's what your rates are based on. And so how we calculate that 50% debt portion is using MFA rates. So yes, even though we don't actually have a lot of debt, we use the MFA rate to calculate that deemed debt portion, which is that 50% that the BCUC has told us that, well, either take out debt or pretend you took out debt and give the rural ratepayer that reduced rate. And that's where we use the MFA rates.
What would happen if the region district said, no, we're not going to build your loan for you?
Yeah, then we would use equity. I mean, if we can't use debt, we would use equity. Yeah, and it wouldn't change the rural ratepayer rates until you get up to over that 50% threshold. So for example, you know, we have 4% or something like that debt. I don't remember the number off the top of my head. The rates won't change until you get up to that 50. If we have 55% debt, then the rural rate will change. But we have a long way to go. I don't think we'd ever reach that threshold.
If that happened, would it change the Nelson dividend?
If we got over that 50% threshold,
Region district.
Uh,
Pay a higher interest.
No, it wouldn't change the rural ratepayers rate.
No, it's not.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Would it change the dividend calculation if we didn't borrow?
With an also dividend be reduced.
I think it would depend on the situation. I mean, I would certainly look at that number for sure, but,
Probably.
it's possible. It depends how much we have at the reserve and where we're sitting in there. But again, that wouldn't impact, yeah, rural rates at all.
Imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, so it would certainly look at,
And yet, as a rule, you can do nothing in return in the way of community building.
Mhm.
We give a service, an electrical.
Yeah.
Electrical facility,
Mhm.
whereas the city users.
Mhm.
Gain municipal benefit for the residents who can vote.
Mhm.
So I think that's the only shadow.
Yeah.
This.
yeah, but,
Rural people get nothing, and yet it seems we're actually helping Nelson to have its dividend increase.
well, I guess I would argue that the COSA model dictates your rates, and that doesn't tie in with the dividend at all. It's actually the COSA
No,
model.
we
that-
don't get the dividend.
Correct.
Perhaps we should.
Yeah.
To the Fortis BC customers, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, that's just how the commission.
So there was a threat or an option of turning the rural service over to Fortis. I don't know how much you have to pay them to take it. But if that was the case, then that benefit for the city of Nelson was getting at the regional district rate would disappear. And it was the city of Nelson that said that they would consider something off the rural service if the push it department.
Yeah.
Or if the BC Utilities Commission can give them what they want.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, we went through the cost of service analysis and everything like that. We went through the cost of service analysis and that because, you know, the rural, providing rates to the power of the rural area was costing the city more and the city was subsidizing the rural rates. So we've now got the cost of service, so the rates are different, but it's still not a good investment for the city in the rural area. So just so we're 100% clear, like the city would be better off if it didn't have to service the rural area. That's just the way the accounting, right?
Yeah.
And Fortis BC, we did have some, negotiations, they did a due diligence, they looked at it and said, we don't want it, it would cost too much money and we'd have to increase rates for the rest of our customers in order to take on the rural service area of Florence and Niagara.
Is the price structure the same everywhere in all the rural districts in BC?
When you say price structure, you mean the actual
Well,
rate
the,
people
the
or how it's?
Nelson City gets this rate, the rural people, because it costs more to service it, have this rate. So that means like people who live in the different rural sections, is that how it works for everywhere? Or is it just special here?
So I remember I started at the beginning, so Nelson Hydro is unique in the province. In that we service urban and are regulated by the City Council for Urban and the rural. So the way the Utilities Commission is, they're regulating only the rural. And so they are regulating the rural the same way as they regulate Fortis BC and BC Hydro. So it's all, the same, how they apply the rules. They spend a lot of time and energy in developing with us their cost of service model and seeing that process through. So we're regulated the same as Fortis BC and BC Hydro. And other small sort of like unique little utilities, like these gas utilities. But Fortis BC and BC Hydro.
I need you to jog my memory just in response to her question. I recall when I was doing my research, my letter to the BC Utilities Commission several years ago about your rate increases, that there is some kind of regulation or ruling for BC Hydro that there isn't a rate differentiation in rural and urban.
Yeah, that's called a postage stamp.
That's
principle.
right.
It's part of the bond rate sort of
Right.
utilities and rate regulations, so it's part of sort of the rate regulated accounting.
I think that's what she's asking about.
Yeah, that's,
So in the
yeah,
rest of the-
and it applies for the part of the utility that the BC Commission, regulates. So, before the Utilities Commission came into play, so like in the 1950s, before BC used to be even a thing, people on the North Shore paid a different rate than people on the South Shore. People out of Ainsworth, because Ainsworth used to be part of Nelson Hydro Supply, used to pay a different rate than the people on the North Shore. So there was all different rates. And I believe it was 1980, if I remember correctly, that they said, oh, this bond rate principle of postage stamp, which means that everybody who's receiving similar service should get a similar rate regardless of their cost of service, spread around. So everybody, all the rural districts all started paying the same rate, which was still higher than what the city was paying up until 1995, when the city raised the rates for urban to equal the rural rates because we were building G5 and a whole bunch of other big capital. So because the city residents fund the capital of the utility, because they are the investors as the city, the rates went up. And then we all got used to sort of the rates being the same. And so, we've now sort of gone through the process with the Utilities Commission, and they've said, yes, we agree that the rates need to reflect the cost of service for the rural area, not tied to what the city has residents pay. And that's what we're presenting here. So that's why we're showing the different rates for the different.
But am I recalling correctly the notice about rate increase currently that, the amount actually hasn't yet been passed by the Utilities Commission?
They've approved 7.54 on an interim recoverable basis,
Which means,
that starting January 1st, we're going to start collecting the 7.54% more on all utility invoices or bills. And the Utilities Commission does take months to work our way through. Last year, it was actually a fast process, and we received approval in June.
but you might not receive approval in June and then in the rebate. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. So if there's any adjustments, then it goes to these deferral.
Yep.
So what happened last year? So we applied for 6.2%. The Utilities Commission, after, months of going through, and there was a whole bunch of stuff to do with the cost of service and adjustments and things like that. They said, no, the rate you should have been charging for 2024 was 4.1%. So we have taken that credit, and it is, deferral accounts for well, actually, it's not going to be the deferral for the next year,
yeah.
because this year is not over yet, so we can't, can't make the adjustments because we don't know how we do it consume in 2024. So once we get those numbers, once 2024 is complete, then we'll figure out what the rebate is, and then that will go into the deferral accounts and you get rebate over 5 years.
5 years, yeah.
Over 5 years?
Yep.
It's rebate to the customers?
Within years. So you're getting the value of that money with interest. But the reason that they spread it over 5 years is because next year it might be the opposite. Maybe, that we should have been higher and then make an adjustment. And so that it just sort of like balances out and smooths out sort of the
God, I hope I don't run my budget at home like that. That's, that's insane.
It is meant to keep you whole. Like Scott was saying, there is interest on that. It is meant to keep you whole, as in there is interest on that. So you shouldn't be, whether it's paid out in year 1 or year 2, it shouldn't matter. Or if the utility has to recover funds because it's undercharged, there's interest on that, and it shouldn't matter whether it's paid out in year 1 or year 2. And as Scott mentioned, they are amortized over a longer period of time because it could work the opposite way. And so we don't want to burden, the ratepayer with a big bump if the BCU thinks the rates should have been higher. So that it is smoothed over several years. So.
Whole idea is to try and sort of not have a big rate increase 1 year and then, negative credit the next year and then sort of back and forth. So the whole idea is
Reality.
well,
It's true, but but it could be a shock to ratepayers, right? Because again, there could be the,
Really a shock, the ratepayers,
right, but it could be more.
could be more. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, and the city is the same. When we're recovering funds as a utility, sorry, I shouldn't say the city, the utility, we amortize that over 5 years as well, right? So it's not like we're trying to recover money in a 1 year and only dish it out over 5 years. We do the same. It's a 5 year deferral account regardless of which direction it is. And that is common with other utilities as well.
Is this your last slide or?
It is, yeah.
Back to the referral accounts. Like I'm having gone through COSA.
Yep.
Now they've been established and I noticed that there's a few more. And I'm not sure where the number of deferral accounts are now, but
Yeah,
7 or 8 or 9.
there's,
something in that
there's,
neighborhood.
yeah, I don't have the exact number. There's about 7, I think. A couple of them will fall off. A couple of those deferral accounts were only for a specific period of time, only for 2 years,
Right.
and we're not renewing that. So once that balance is gone,
Mhm.
we're not gonna use that deferral account anymore. So there's more now than there
Yeah.
might be in the future.
So
Yeah,
the question I have is because that's a rural item.
Yeah.
Not urban, and BCUC is involved.
Yeah.
What are the rules around those? Are they all treated the same as with regard to dollars in, dollars out and the reporting of that? And does that have to go to BCUC and they publish that?
the BCUC does get the deferral account worksheet and the breakdown of all the dollars and cents. Yes, it was in our application.
It was in the application, yeah, but the actual spreadsheet, I don't believe was shared on that. They only do
Oh, maybe.
PDF versions of the results, but the commission has the actual spreadsheet, so they can look down and make sure that.
Okay, yeah, so they can,
And it's calculated
the way the methodology employed to calculate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we also, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, they have a compliance team that's what they do. It's like, we directed you to do this, we submit it, they go through in excruciating detail, sort of every line, every calculation, make sure that we are calculating exactly the way they directed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're, depending on the deferral account, like let's say the vegetation
Yeah.
control.
That's
They
a
might have-
that's a bad example, because vegetation is within the city of Nelson's control, so it's not, there's no deferral account for vegetation management. But say storm would be. a-
Storm, yeah, that's what usually there, it goes up when there's a storm and you have to.
Yeah.
Take care of fallen trees or whatever.
Yeah.
So that account operates. It might have certain qualifiers that the BCUC said, okay, this should be handled this way.
Yep.
As opposed to, something else where, like last year where the revenues were higher based on the increase for, I don't know how many months, a few.
Mhm.
And that extra money goes into a different deferral account
Mhm.
and then redistributed.
Yep.
That's another point.
Yeah, and so to your question, yeah, all those deferral accounts are handled the exact same way. And they're actually netted out at the end of the year when we're doing our budget. So for example, let's say there's a credit back to customers of $100,000. But if there's a recovery of $100,000, we'll net out that deferral account and it'll be effectively zero. So everything's, all the work is there so you can see the individual accounts, but it is netted at the end of the year and that net dollar amount goes into the budget for the given year. Yeah, but they're all handled the same way as they all have amortization periods. Some of the ones that are falling off have a 2-year amortization period, and that was for a specific reason. But the remainder of the ones, I think, or all of the ones that will remain, have a 5-year amortization period. Yeah, and they're all handled the same way. Yeah.
So as far as the deferral accounts that we kind of peeked out, there's 7 of them and then.
Yeah, I mean,
Subject to change.
subject to change. I mean, it could change in the future for sure. But we're comfortable with the deferral accounts we have here. This is all new for us as well. So we're, put these deferral accounts in place, got approval by the BCUC to do so and how we use them. And yeah, that's our plan to go forward with those. If things come up in the future where we'll need another deferral account, I mean, we'd entertain that at that time, but we don't have plans to do so.
Yeah.
This time.
And do the silos remain whole? If, let's say, if there's a deficit in one, you don't borrow from one deferral account for the other.
Correct.
They're siloed.
They're siloed, however, they're net together to get a final one number that goes in the COSA model. So they're the balance of all of them are net together to go into the budget. But aside from that, they're managed in silos, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
That makes
storm control would be a probably one of the larger ones. Or the storm cleanup and depending on the year.
Depending on the year, yeah, for sure. We budget based on a 5-year average, taking out some anomalies. So that the actual dollar value we have in storm reserve budget is relatively low. But often we don't hit that number, but then you get a big storm year and you might surpass that by a few $100,000. So it depends on the year.
Fire falls into that as well.
Yes.
Yeah, it would.
The storm,
Because
the
it's-
storm
yeah.
account is like storms, earthquakes.
Yeah.
Floods, fires, sort of any natural disaster that is uncontrollable, out of the control of the city.
Yeah. Yeah, any major weather events and fire. Yeah. Okay, pass it back to you, Scott.
Yeah, I'll carry on and sort of try and explain sort of, some of the details behind that in terms of what we're doing for plans. If anybody wants, now would be maybe the time to, you want to grab something to drink or anything like that, sort of, I can take 1 minute if you need a chocolate snack or something like that to get you through. And if you haven't signed in, I'd appreciate if anybody is can just at least, if you don't want to put your email address, you can at least put your name down so I know how many people came. If you leave your email address, I will send out a thank you and sort of follow-up email, like with answers to questions like Josh had asked and things like that, to make sure that we get that information. Oh, you figured it out. Jillian, forgot to ask, have we got anybody online asking me any questions or anything?
No questions. We have 2 gentlemen who have joined, two people. And so, yes, and they can ask questions anytime. And Scott, we can make sure their questions are answered.
Awesome, thanks very much, Julie. And the volume of the sound is okay and,
I can hear you fine. Yeah.
okay,
And we can hear the discussion in the room, and the audio is good, so we are following the discussion.
great,
Yeah.
okay, perfect. Okay, so let's flip to the first slide. And I'm just gonna give you a quick update on our regulatory processes. Yeah, next slide, Julie, there we go, it just takes a second on that. So I know a number of people have been involved in some of the regulatory, so I'll just give you a quick update on where things are at. So 2024 done, approved in June. The regulatory efficiency initiative, something that the BCUC had started last year. And one of the things that they did was revise some of their processes to try and speed up these proceedings and make them more efficient. And so the 2024 process, like I said, we got the approval in June as opposed to December, I think was when we got the 2023 application approved. So, we pretty much finished the whole year before they approved our rate increase. So it's getting better. They've recognized on how to try and make it better. So we also submitted an application this summer for terms and conditions of service, otherwise known as the Hydro Services Bylaw. So it is all the details that outline sort of legal framework around how the utility interacts with customers in terms of fees and charges, as well as like how to get any service and service quality and all the standards that we are held to. So the Utilities Commission reviewed that and they approved that in October. So again, that was a pretty efficient process. So happy to see sort of how that moved along. Yes, go ahead.
Lifetime the utilities data for us, or what's going to be part of these, an application to serve.
Yes.
And that's no longer there before.
No, I'm pretty sure that all the utilities in the because we are a national monopoly. Once you've been connected,
That says they don't have an obligation to serve.
oh, okay. I'm unfamiliar with that.
Okay.
It is a, you know, normal, expectation that once you connect, a utility connects a customer, that they have an obligation to provide, continue to provide service to that customer. They can't say, oh, well, it costs us too much money to keep the lights on at Josh's house, we're just gonna cut them off. So, I don't know if Fortis has a different,
No, not for us. Utility commission say that.
that's news to me. Yeah. Okay, generic cost of capital. So this one's a very convoluted one. The Utilities Commission does it every 10 years. It's not initiated by Nelson Hydro, but this is how they established that return on equity that we talked about. So that proceeding, the stage 2, which is applied to Nelson Hydro, for small utilities, just wrapped up. So phase 1 was setting the benchmark. So they used Fortis BC as the benchmark. And they said, okay, this is what, a fair return is for Fortis BC. And then phase 2 was all the other utilities were supposed to compare to what Fortis is and argue sort of, for and against sort of whether we should receive more or less of a return. So that has just concluded. And so Nelson Hydro did get a bump in our return on equity, so from 9.25 to 10.4. Now the impact of that will be recalculated as part of a deferral account for next year. So we'll see that in 2026. So we'll go sort of into that rate smoothly to make sure that, we're not bumping prices. So there's been an adjustment and a decision by the Utilities Commission around that. I just read it this morning because I was away the last couple of days of last week. But yeah, they've just made that decision. So they've set a return on equity for all the utilities in the province. All right, so then the last one is the Fortis BC rate setting framework. So that's where we got the 5.3% rate increase number, and we've been running along with that. Now Fortis just at the beginning of November recalculated, and they said no, it's going to be 5.65. So we don't have that in our numbers. They just increased it. It's not huge in terms of the impact on Nelson Hydro, but that too will also go into the revenue account for adjustment next year. Because we've already applied for and received approval for the 7.54. So we're not going to change that. We're going to apply that on January 1st. So this change will be reflected in 2026 and along with sort of any other deferral account adjustment. Okay, so that's where regulatory is at. So I don't have any more slides on that. If there's any other questions on regulatory proceedings, fortunately, the slides getting smaller and kind of knocking off some of these big proceedings. And so let's get into what the utility is doing. So generation needs of power. I talked to Neil Dermody's our operations manager. So this is keeping the lights on. So I mentioned we've got 6 power line technicians and 3 operations folks to basically keep things working on a day-to-day basis. So that's the crew. Flip the next slide. So where we start with safety. Now, it has not been a good year for Nelson Hydro in 2024. So we've had 3 lost time incidents. We are really trying to refocus on safety to try and correct that ship. We had gone 3 years with 0 lost time incidents, and now we have 3 in just 2024, and we're not even finished the year. So trying to get the utility back on track with that. We've done a lot of work in terms of trying to implement better safety practices, especially electrical safety program, and trying to make sure that the workers and the public are safe every day. Dam safety review. So we've been going through BC dam safety, looking at the power plant. So the plant's 20 years old now, and so they've have some questions, a number of different things that they've asked us to do. So we've been been back and forth with the province on that. We have an action plan and, you know, we saw some of the capital numbers for going forward. We got about $10 million we think we need to spend over the next 10 years to, you know, meet the current safety codes for the dam we own and operate. Yeah, so our system safety and lockout is another big initiative for the crews, trying to make sure that we're fully compliant with electrical safety code, technical safety BC and work safety BC in terms of how we're managing our lockouts and taggouts to keep our workers safe. So we'll go to the next slide.
Can I ask you a question before you move in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
3 lost time incidents. Those are worker injuries.
those are worker injuries.
Are those injuries when the workers are responding to power outages?
No. No, none of them were, oh, no, I guess one of them was, yeah, one of them was, it was a blown fuse and he was injured, working along sort of, you know, replacing a fuse and slipped and injured his ankle. Yeah, there's no correlation between them other than all three were line workers, so power line technicians that were injured this year.
So the workload of the reduced line force, do you don't feel has an impact on that, where they're perhaps being overloaded?
I don't believe so. Like I said, we were 3 years, you know, no lost time injuries. And then this year we've had several, so
That's.
they work hard every day for sure. There's no question.
They're some of the best.
You betcha.
Fine lines, no matter where.
Yeah.
But that's 50% of your. That's 6 months of supervising.
Yeah, no, I'm embarrassed by this. Trust me. You know, this is not good.
And it just relates back to my first question about the number of full-time employees working is actual not improved. You know, perhaps it's gone a long way, or management has increased slightly, and the actual hands-on has decreased.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways you can look at that as well. Yes, there's some management staff, but that's so that we can make sure that we have safety practices and things like that that are in place so that we can, you know, support the guys in the field with, you know, better technology, better ability to sort of, you know,
But you've
do
got
the job safely.
When you've got a certain amount of time, these cells probably, or it could, I don't know if it is, but these people, it would probably do a lot of overtime, may not have the opportunity to take time off in place, maybe to do wages, maybe it's just one thing too much pressure with the.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's, you know, I'm looking at all those things, because for sure, with only 6 guys, we have 2 people on call 24/7, 365 days a year. So, you know, every 3 weeks, they're on call, right? Sometimes they don't get any calls. Sometimes they get 6 or 7 in one day. Yeah, just depends on what the weather's doing or other conditions like that. So, yeah, no, it's a real,
Well, of course, the whole supply system has a role too, the population and the building.
Yeah.
So again, you know, it's sort of counterproductive to be reducing your full-time staff. And you can't rely on contractors to show up with an accident, deal with it immediately, so. I think it's a fault that Nelson Hydro should look at.
Okay.
Their workforce.
Is it a matter of record that there was a reduction in full-time licensed staff?
Over the last 15 or 20 years.
Over the last 15 or 20 years? Oh, I see, okay. Well,
so in the last
let's just talk about this.
4 years since I've been here, so I think I could probably go back probably 10 years. It's been 5. And we increased to 6, 2 years ago.
Okay, so that's important.
And there might have been 10 or 11. Back 10, 12 years ago.
And workload might be too.
Yeah, no, a lot has changed in the last 20 years, yeah, for sure. Yeah, a lot, there's technology, you know, we have, you know, the crews have access to much better equipment and not to be able to do the work. They don't climb as much as they used to, which takes a lot longer, so jobs are more efficient. So there's lots of things that sort of, you know, impact that. So right now, we're pretty happy with the 6 number. start to get bigger, then you need more supervisors, so, you know, you should, you know, there's a balance there. And we are fortunate to have, good contract crews available who do respond, like, right now, like, we've had some big storms, even one in September. And the Martech crew, I think that storm rolled through around 6 p.m. and the Martech crew is on the North Shore by 7. Yeah, so, you know, get that, and Maple Leaf is just as good, they weren't available for that particular storm, but they have been for other incidents, so we get good service from that perspective. Okay, just a few things going on in the power plant, so annual maintenance is always a big thing to try and keep these units running, remember, you know, these are very old units, some of them. Unfortunately, this year, you know, it was actually only 3 weeks ago that doing the annual maintenance of G2, that unit, which was first started up in 1910, the main operating ring has developed some serious cracks in it, and it needs to be completely overhauled. You know, it's 120 years old, that unit. So right now we've taken it out of service and we'll be analyzing, you know, what the next step is to do with that unit. I know it's been taken out of service at least twice in the past, and then years later, they said, oh, okay, it's worth, you know, reinvesting and putting some money into it. Normally, when you design these things, you design them for like 50 years. So 120 is pretty good. We've got our money out of this one. So we just have to figure out what the next step is with G2. The only impact on operations right now is we'll be a little bit shy on freshet. So when we're generating, we'll lose you know, about a megawatt, a little less than a megawatt. That's what G2 produces. So that period when there's excess water in the system is typically only when G2 is running. So it's just sort of like capturing that extra little bit of water during freshet. And then sometimes we've been running it when we've been doing maintenance on G5. So we just have to sort of be a bit more, you know, thoughtful in our planning for G5. We can't just like take it down sort of G2 and do that. We just need to plan those a bit more carefully. And then, yeah, vegetation management has been a big deal. This year, we part of our dam safety is there's a big rock bluff overhanging the power plant, so we did a bunch of vegetation management. So those are kind of the big stuff that was going on for operations. So they're day to day keeping the lights on. Oh gosh, Jillian's pointing to the rock bluff here. There, sure. Back to Jillian. All right, next slide. Yeah, so introduced this year. I've talked about our asset management program. So we're now starting to be able to sort of monitor sort of, you know, the health of the assets. So you can kind of see, so you know, we've got some new reinvestments, so into the dark green are the things that are like brand new and, you know, we're in good shape. Obviously, way down to the reds are things that are very poor. I suspect if G2 is taken away from there, the red's going to go way down because most of the red there or the 12 pieces of equipment are related to G2. So we're working on trying to improve our asset management and making those investments before the equipment gets very poor. So that's just one of the initiatives that we've been working on. Next slide. So our line crew. So the test and treat is a big annual program where we test 1/8 of all the poles in our area. We do it by section. So this year we tested 619 poles. We only had 72 that we needed to replace. And with that 6 power line technicians, we were able to do almost half of them. So 34 of those poles were replaced by our own internal crews. The rest were contracted out. Again, sort of, to try and, get those all done in the summer when you can do it efficiently to keep it going. Substation maintenance, trying to make sure that everything is working properly so that when we have any issues that those breakers and closers and everything are all working. And like Josh, you mentioned sort of, like how much development there is. So the line crew has been kept very busy with new service requests, just constantly. We get 30 or 40 per month throughout the year, everything from just upgrading the service panel to major line extensions. So these guys are kept pretty busy this year. with that level of activity. All right, next slide. Everybody always wants to hear about the outages, so, 2023 versus 2024. You may remember a couple of years ago, one of the biggest pieces of the pie was our loss of supply here. So that's when we were losing Fortis. So 30 line that runs and ties in at Coffee Creek. So the residents of the North Shore were often, more often than not impacted because Fortis supplied down to power down to Redfish. We've been working very closely with Fortis, and you can see it went way down in 2023 and even smaller in 2024. So that's made a huge difference for our reliability. These pies overall sort of, we're still sort of, trying to notch down the total overall minutes. Tree contacts and adverse weather still, are their biggest thing. Those of you who live in town may remember in halfway up the North Shore, we had an incident in July where we lost the city and most of the North Shore for an hour or so as a result of an incorrect setting with our new Mill Street substation. So we just commissioned the first transformer on that. We've done all the checks, but there was one setting that as a result of sort of the conditions at the time, it tripped when it shouldn't have tripped. Took us a little bit to figure it out and got everything back on, but that's what that human element is. It's sort of, that's what we keep track of, sort of, when stuff goes wrong. So
But you said that Fortis supplies the Redfish, and on the other side, and town is supplied
by Mill Street.
by Mill Street, and Fortis comes to that connection point as well. Then,
Well, we're connected to Fortis at Coffee Creek,
right,
but we exclusively use power from that connection at Coffee Creek to supply the rest of the whole.
I see, which is more efficient than shoving power out from Mill Street.
Yeah, like if you get on line, most of the long farther you go.
Yeah.
So it's just, the way the system is until we, put a new substation or some sort of generating capacity on the shore.
Okay, so it's,
So we have to get a feed from both ends. So that's where the current,
so I'm not using any electrons from Bonington at all, it's all Fortis.
that's right, yeah. Yeah, if you're anywhere from Redfish to Coffee Creek, those electrons are all coming through Fortis.
What's the foreign interference?
Those are things like, hang on, there's birds and wildlife separate. Hang on, let's go to the next slide, Jillian. I think we got the explanations here, just to, in case of it. Yeah, so it is birds, yeah, so birds, animals, vehicles, so I think there's been 4 or 5.
It's not,
4 or 5 taken out by vehicles on the North Shore. Accidents. In fact, one pole got knocked down twice.
So that's foreign.
Yeah, so that's foreign interference. Yeah, so no, it's not China or Russia sort of like, hacking into our system or anything like that. But yeah, so we have some definitions here. These are definitions set by the Electricity Canada. So, the statistics that we keep are matched with the rest of the utilities across the country, and then we share our statistics and vice versa. And I've got some more to share, which are also next slide. Yeah. So these are our reliability statistics. Again, these are calculated as per formulas directed by Electricity Canada so that they can be compared by utilities across the country. I talked about the index of reliability. So this one here is where 99.9634% of the time our customers had power. Yeah, year to date, 2024. This is the end of Q2 2024. So the red line is the national average, or sorry, it's not an average, it's sort of the number that, is produced for the national number. So you can see we had a few bad years there. Now, remember, a bad year is 99.7, as it compared to 99.963, right? So, we've been able to pull that back up so that we're now showing consistently above the national figures. From a,
Do you break that down between rural and urban?
we do, I don't have a slide for that.
Areas get knocked out a hell of a lot more times in the city.
That is true. So we do have the different statistics and we do submit that. So the current rate application to the Utilities Commission shows the statistics for rural only. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head and I didn't include a slide just for the rural. But it's, you know, looks the same as this. We've come back up. I can't remember if we're below or above the, you know, the national figure.
For the rural area.
For the rural areas, yeah, you know, but it's not, you know, the shape of the curve looks exactly the same. I can, it'll be on the website as well, but I could share a PDF copy of the presentation.
I could share that.
I can do that, yep. I'll just make sure that I know that. And so the SAIDI and SAFE, so again, these are national statistics. It's a system outage duration, and this is outage frequency. So SAFE, the F is for frequency, S is duration. So the duration is the number of minutes the average customer in the system sees their power out. And the frequency is the number of times the average person sees their power out. So again, we were, you know, not doing so great, 2018 to 2021, and then we really started to bring that down for our city and our city. So we, you know, we're down there, and those numbers get reflected in the index of environment. Right, storms. We've been talking about storms a bit there. So this was the scary year where we were like, what's going on? Where is this trend going? But yeah, the weather gods are a little bit unpredictable. So a big drop in 2022, 0 in 2023. And then this year we've had storm at the end of July, and then the end of September, we had kind of 2 back-to-back, you know, resulted in.
So you're saying in 2023, we had no power outages?
No, I'm saying we had no storms.
Storms, okay.
Yeah, and these are major storms, so not just sort of like, you know, okay, we got to get rain and, you know, half a dozen customers. These are major storms, and again, this is a Electricity Canada sort of, you know, calculation of what constitutes a major storm. So it's, you know, for us, it's more than 25% of our customers out for more than 2 hours. So that's what we consider a major storm. So that's when we start to calculate, you know, the costs to restore after a big, you know, wind event or something like that. So, yeah, so that's what the numbers look like. Nathan was talking about the budget. He said, you know, we typically budget on a 5-year average. So I think the number was a bit over $100,000 that we've been budgeting. So credit in 2023, debit in 2024.
Just remember 2021. I think in that year, we lost 5 appliances, electrical things, you know, for unknown reason. And so we don't have a surge protector on our panel. Is there something in, like, is it, I don't know if that's what caused it all, but I have heard other people that say, yes, it was a surge protector. I just wonder with your system, are you managing, is that being managed better, or is that still a big risk, or why, yeah?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, so we have a power system engineer now who's looking at those things specifically. So, you know, balances between lines and that, because part of our terms and conditions of service that I talked about that we just got approved includes our commitment to power quality. So, you know, the range of voltage that we supply and the range of the frequency and the power quality. Now, you know, those are within sort of the range. Any appliances that you have should be able to operate fully as long as we're supplying at you know, in that range. And if we go outside of that range and you can demonstrate to us that we did and it caused a failure in compliance, then you know, we have insurance that covers, so you can submit an insurance claim to say, hey,
Anything to mitigate that risk to me, so I don't have to put in a certain protector. I think I have to do my own panels.
Yeah, so the power systems engineer is looking at sort of like making sure that all of our systems are operating the way they should, and that we continuously supply power within that range that we've committed to.
So what do you capital do we do to provide that quality control? Like, what do you do? What is there practically to do for quality?
Yeah, I'll cover some capital items in a second, but in particular, the systems control and data acquisition system, so our SCADA system, monitors that. So we've been expanding the amount of points that we can monitor and manage so that, you know, and constantly control, make adjustments if there's something that's not operating within range, or we can predict that there's an issue more quickly. So that's primarily sort of the what the power system engineer is focused on, is sort of that, you know, protection and controls, coordination, and making sure that, you know, everything is balanced and operating efficiently. Okay, moved on from storms. What else we got here? Vegetation management. So you guys probably saw a lot of the crews out on the North Shore here. This was a big focus here. Kind of focus on the North Shore almost pretty much every year, and I'll show that in the next slide. But you know, we use a, you know, GIS sort of tracking app where, you know, we go around and we identify, you know, what needs to be worked on. We write a prescription, and then we hire contract crews. We also have the city of Nelson crews that work for Nelson Hydro. And you know, they pick off each one of these areas, and so you can see big push on the North Shore for that. Next slide is the budget. So we were trying to rotate around, you know, our vegetation management. We're finding that, and we were hoping that, you know, kind of after a big, you know, peak, that we would be able to start to bring our vegetation management costs down because we were catching up. Turns out we haven't seen that downturn yet. We're still seeing that vegetation growth this year. It's incredible sort of how much trees grew. So stuff that we were at 3 years ago is now back again. So we're really trying to cut to ground anything that we can. Not always easy. You know, people in the neighborhood sort of will often sort of resist that, but there's a negotiation. We have a contractor arborist who identifies areas, talks to the local community, and sort of sees what they can do. But we're trying to, you know, bring this down. But we're spending about $150,000 every year on vegetation management. As you can see, the North Shore eats up a lot. Okay, next slide. All right, test and treat, talked about that earlier. So for 2024, so our plan for 2025, we're going to be on the South Shore. As I said, we've got an 8-year rotation. So this year we're going to be mostly in the Tagam area like that. Which should. Okay, next slide. All right, talked about the asset management framework. So we're really trying to sort of get better at managing and being proactive with our maintenance. And we'll continue on with our safety training and programming this year. And I think that might be it. Yeah, okay, so that's the guys that keep the lights on. Now, all the other stuff that Casey Smith manages for us. So next slide, we'll just talk about his team. So we've got billing and collections and metering. On one side, they're designers who are doing all of these system upgrades and one calls and things like that for anything that customers are looking to improve or upgrade or change within the system. And then we've got all of our capital projects in engineering. So moving on to the next slide. Customer growth. So this is again to the end of Q3. So it isn't like we dropped off. It just means that we only have the calculation to the end of September. So we're expecting that's going to be sort of in the same range. So, you know, we're just steadily increasing the load. The blue bar shows that most of our customers are residential, right? The yellow is the commercial side. So most of Nelson Hydro is residential. We have no industrial customers, very few commercial customers relative to the number of or the load that's pulled by residential. So that means that, you know, we manage the load of sort of people's daily lives. So we see our peaks, you know, in the morning when people are getting up and you know, got the toaster going and cranking the heat up, and then in the evening when everybody's got their dishwashers on and things like that. So that's the customer growth. So we predict that. That's all part of the financial calculations. On the billing side, everybody should have received their cost of living credit disbursement that went out from the provincial government. So sure that we're all getting you know, some benefit to our cost of living. Our e-billing is something we're trying to like promote, so we're up to 32%. Still trying to sort of increase the number of people who get their bills electronically, just to save on paper, save on time, energy, to be more efficient as a utility. It also gives people sort of more access to, you know, the little graphs and things like that, so they can monitor their usage. Hopefully, you know, figure out ways to reduce their overall consumption.
You can get an e-billing instead of the mail.
Yes, yes,
You just sign up for it.
you just sign up for it.
Oh,
You just,
okay.
yeah, go on our website, you know, there's I think it says pay your bill online, and then you register.
Well, we have it coming off, and so we just get a paper bill,
Oh, okay.
reconciliation, I guess.
Yeah, no, you can go in there and, you know,
And get
sign for
that.
account and just click on, electronic billing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, save us paper, save us all a bit of money. It's small, but it's, you know, it's what we're trying to do, part of, you know, better service to the customers. We're also putting out a service and metering guide. It's tied in with our bylaw update, our hydro services bylaw that we, you know, refreshed our terms and conditions of service. We want to make sure that people have like the information they need in order to sort of, you know, do upgrades and provide to electricians and contractors sort of with the information, you know, that utility needs and vice versa to be able to upgrade the services efficiently. And then we talked about this quite a bit a few years ago, but we've got some customers that are still using 10 to 30%, 30 times the average residential use. We think that there may be something else going on there, so we've started, putting in demand meters to monitor those, and then they're now going to pay for the higher demand
I
there.
mean, grow-ups.
Yeah.
Grow-ups?
It could be a welding shop, like, you know, maybe they just,
Oh, okay.
the hobby welders or something like that.
That's a good spot for that conversation. I mean, maybe it's a little more national and political, but you know, we're obviously, and Karen reminded me when she turned on the heaters, we are moving to a more electrical world. We're being asked to do so for, you know, environmental reasons. What I'm not, you know, I think this came to head yesterday with me. A neighbor came by and says, "Oh, I've gone to diesel heating my house." And he loves it, and he says it costs him pennies compared to the electrical that I just moved to by buying mini splits this summer. So what is it that's going to, it's obviously not going to be 7% increases. It's going to motivate people to move to more electrical, whether it's cars, whether it's mini splits, you know, whatever there is that takes us off fossil fuels. I'm not feeling very comfortable about going the electrical path rather than going the fossil fuels again.
Yeah, that's a bigger conversation than you can start, you know, carbon tax, you know, that's sort of, you know, you start charging sort of, you know, where the emissions are coming from. That's how, you know, Europe and other places, you know, like, you know, Europeans, you know, no problem switching because it costs them 5 or 6 times, you know, more to heat with fossil fuels than it is for other alternatives.
But as a
Electrical system.
that's exactly where I'm going. You know, as a consumer, you're being asked to move off fossil fuels, but I still need to heat the house. And so I'm going down a pathway that is, regardless of the carbon tax, feels more expensive than fossil fuels actually do.
Yeah, like I said, you know, like, you know, electrification is our best path right now for reducing greenhouse gases. And yes, the electrical infrastructure will, you know,
Well, like Speed
be managed
is a
to.
huge electrical plant that came in. And I think it was the last meeting last year that we were told that it's already spoken for. None of it is coming down here,
Yes.
like none of the electrical. So like, where are you gonna get the
BC Hydro's got a call for power out, so, you know, like, we don't really have much of an impact on the provincial picture. BC Hydro's, they monitor this very closely, and yeah, they've got a call for power out right now. They'll be bringing on, I don't know, how many gigawatts of power by 2028. 2030 is kind of the window that they think that, you know, we're gonna be a net importer, because right now we're selling power to the states.
Yeah,
In Alberta. But by 2028 to 2030 is when provincially we are forecasting that, you know, the efforts of the electrification and everything else, we're then going to sort of need to import. So they're bringing on new capacity in order to promote that. And that includes, BC Hydro has offered rebates for people who put rooftop solar. And
The what?
Rooftop solar. So again,
so then you have like BC or Nelson Hydro has a solar thing.
But
Does that-
can you add a comment about solar that would be more relevant than talking about solar again? I've got solar on my roof. I have a credit on my bill from April right through till October this year. That's all I have done.
Well, we have
And
solar here.
second comment, this pricing of fossil fuel energy versus electricity is so global in nature that Nelson Hydro can only do so many things, the carbon price can only do so many things. Listen to this, the reason the price of oil is still stuck around $70 despite war in the Middle East is because China has built and has sold so many electric cars, it's softened their demand for oil. So because of their electric cars, your diesel's cheaper. Interesting, right? It's all so interconnected, like, good luck sorting it all out.
Oh, yeah, no, I start preface saying that this will probably be on the conversation. With you.
Yeah, it's what.
and I should just point out, I realize we've been talking a lot and answering questions as we go along. We're at the 5 minute left of the presentation, so I'll try and scooch through the last few slides, and then try and wrap up on time. And if you want to stay and answer questions, I'm happy to do so. So Jillian, let's see what else we got left to talk about. Lots of customer projects, 1,000 BC1 call requests. So that's what that design team is doing. They're like out there making sure that, you know, the call before you dig. So 390 standard inquiries, like I said, about 30-ish per month. Lots of big project coming on. Couldn't Ferry electrification, that one sort of might be impacting this area here. As soon as they figure out what it is they want to do. Right, so all these things take our designers time, and and our big projects that we need to manage. Next. Capital projects, talk about Mill Street. So we are commissioning phase 2 starting last week. We hope to have that fully functioning by the end of the year. So that's why Nathan was talking about the impact. So, you know, that gets added to rate base in the year that it becomes serviceable. So that's why you see that bump in our rate base, Mill Street. Big project, really happy with the way it looks. This shows sort of phase 1. Right now, there's another transformer and everything is all on that side. So it's gonna look nice and be wrapped up and have really good reliability relative to the old system for another 5 decades or so. So yeah, really nice to see that one wrapping up. Our geographic information system, that's a tool, a modernization tool. It's going to help us, manage outages, respond to issues in the system, and be able to keep better track of all the work that we do. Talked a bit about SCADA, in terms of expanding that. All these things are to modernize the utility. So Nelson Hydro is a little bit behind most utilities in North America right now. So we're trying to inch our way back up to catch up so that we've got the same tools and can provide the same levels of service that other utilities. Talked about dam safety already and some of the work there. Mountain Nelson line replacement is a big capital project for 2025. So that's the line that goes up from 1 mile all the way up to the top of Mount Nelson that powers the CDC tower and everything like that. Those poles are barely hanging on. We're hoping we can get one more winter out of them because we've got there's, it's a big cost, and so everybody's been avoiding it for a lot of years. So we've got to, have to go ahead to start working on it for this year. and a lot of helicopter work and then we'll put some of those poles in. So that's a big one. Pressure vessels in the power plant, again, older plant, need to sort of make sure we keep things safe for people. There's lots of smaller things, the on generating station. We're gonna be planning for some more transmission work. We do have that, 20-kilometer transmission line that comes from the plant into town. So there's some work that needs to be done there. And then I talked a lot about advanced metering in previous years. You know, it's slowly coming, recognizing that, in 2028, we're coming up to a bit of a wave. All of the meters that, the automated meters that are currently on your houses right now, the first batch of those that were installed in 2004 are all coming in end of life. So we have to replace a big batch of meters in 2028, another big batch in 2029, another big batch. So we want to get ourselves ready to be replacing those with smart meters. So it's advanced metering infrastructure that will allow you as customers to be able to monitor your own consumption on an hour by hour basis. It gives a lot more data for the utility to be able to manage system stability and control. We can respond directly to, outages rather than waiting for someone to phone us and say, hey, my power's out. So a lot of advantages to the aim line, and expect to hear a bit more as we put the business case together. We did do a preliminary a couple of years ago. And whoa, that's gonna be really expensive. So we kind of cooled our heels a little bit. I'm working with the other BC municipal utilities, so Penticton, Sunline, Grand Forks, to see if we can kind of get a bit of a bulk buy going here. Fortis BC is Fortis Gas is putting smart meters in all their gas customers across the province. So some early conversations with them, can we lean on some of their infrastructure and sort of, share some of the costs. So trying to figure out how we can bring that project cost. The initial estimate was 9 million. I've got 7 million in the budget. I'm hoping we can bring that down with the business case this year. So we'll be spending some time this year on developing that and taking it to the Utilities Commission this time next year. That's the plan.
That's a great idea, collaborating with those other municipal utilities.
Yeah, it's just, to do it on your own as a small utility is pretty tough, and that's why, 90% of all customers in Canada, electricity customers in Canada already have smart meters. That last 10%, it's all the small utilities, because it's just really hard to sort of make that big of an investment to pay off and add the value. Right?
Yeah, it's not just the meters, we think it'd be a per house price, but it's the infrastructure behind it, the computing power and also storage and service.
We've got to, and we've got to, get, the signals from all those meters all the way back, to a central hub. And it's easy if it's like an apartment building with, 100 meters, but if it's, one house at the end of, some long rural road in the North Shore, you gotta get a separate.
There's a lot of people happy about that being that last minute.
Yeah. I'm curious to see how the Fortis rollout goes, because I know BC Hydro had a hard time when they rolled out smart meters, 15 years ago. I don't know how much attitudes have changed on things like that, but we'll kind of get a sense as far as starts to roll out in 2025. Okay, next slide. We're overdue now. EcoSafe program. All I'm gonna say to this is, there's resources available. We've got a great team there. Nelson Hydro supports that, those initiatives with the Regional Energy Efficiency Program. You can see there was a really big rush to get subscribed in February, because in March, the federal government was cutting off the Greener Home Grant. But surprisingly, actually, there's still lots of people registering, and it's still a small number. It's still like 10 people per month are taking advantage of those energy efficiencies. And the way we're all going to be able to sort of keep our costs down and help the greenhouse gases is by, investing in, better efficiency, windows, insulating, putting in your mini split heat pumps that are going to be 3 times more efficient than your baseboard heaters, or that. So, we're trying to do our piece by supporting that. So, last bunch of slides, just me. Okay, let's flip on. So these are just some of the things that, I wanted to highlight. We talked about regulatory, processes. BC Hydro, even in arbitration with BC Hydro to try and get them to pay a fair price for the power that they buy during freshet. We lost. So we're gonna continue to, subsidize BC Hydro customers, for the power that they purchase in the spring. And don't get me started on it. It's just, we thought we'd put a good case together, but the arbitrator ruled in their favor. It's all about an agreement that was signed in 1989, and the interpretation of that agreement. But, we currently, sell BC Hydro power at 0.7 cents a kilowatt hour and buy it back from through Fortis BC for 5.4 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's really not a good deal for us. It just bugs me, but we couldn't win that argument, so we're stuck with that until 2035 when we get to renegotiate that. So, other things, I've been working a little bit with the local First Nations just to try and, some of these projects like on Origin Road, Mount Nelson, things like that. Need to sort of make sure that we're following all the reconciliation recommendations. And I mentioned before that I do meet with the other BC municipal utilities to try and collaborate on different ideas and projects to gain best practices. So that's it. There's some rate comparisons at the end here. You're welcome to flip the chart there. So in terms of the rate increases, Nathan already showed you these numbers. If you consume more, it's going to look more like this for rural and urban with the rate increases that we've got. So consumption dependent. If you flip to the next slide, it shows the comparison to the other utilities in the province. Again, I've got all the small utilities there. Somebody was asking me about BC Hydro. BC Hydro rates are so much cheaper. It is when you're down here. You can see it's hard to see the BC Hydro, the light gray. They're cheaper than we are for both urban and rural, sort of, for low consumers. But when you get up sort of, higher, anything above 1,500 and higher, BC Hydro is significantly more, and that's because they have a tiered rate. So there's a big jump for BC Hydro customers. So, for higher consuming customers, we're down in the lowest rates here, other than New Westminster, who has the advantage of being connected directly to the low rates of BC Hydro. And they don't have a tiered rate. So I think we're doing okay in terms of the other utilities. Fortis BC, a lot of questions about, wouldn't it be better to just go with Fortis BC? So they're that next rate here. So they're the highest in the province for every consumption rate, about 20% higher than the Nelson Hydro rates. So we do our best to keep the costs low for the customers. I know, no one likes to see rates go up, but we do need to make sure the utility is still viable and we are able to reinvest in the infrastructure and meet the expectations of our customers. So I think that's all I've got. Yeah, so talking about the team, we've been doing what we can to sort of, meet the needs of customers and communicate. I don't know if anybody's on Instagram or Facebook. We have been trying to sort of, put information out there and give that, give some communication channels. And we're just working on getting better. And that's all I've got to say. Any last questions? Yeah.
My questions are, you see that it's kind of a strange time, still we got quite a few people out. So it'd be nice to see you back next year.
Okay. Yeah, I will continue to engage the public in these sort of things. And if we can figure out a different time, I wasn't able to book this in the evening, so it was kind of like, afternoon, maybe a good time slot too. So, go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of personally, because we probably have that process. We won't but a year and a half, but it's getting towards the end of its life. Say it's 15-year, 14-year lifespan. Well, it's now the house is 16 years old. And I see these rebates being floated around here and there. If I was to go into another heat pump system, which would be a lot more efficient than the one we have, which would be the way to go. Would I be able to qualify through some programs to get a new heat pump system?
You betcha, there's some big rebates for heat pumps going on now. Either, just, call our energy efficiency people directly or go on the website and there's a form you can fill out and they'll reach out to you and do an interview. They've got, a heating specialist that can sort of, guide you through sort of, choices. They can tell you sort of, what programs you could be eligible for depending on, various factors around your house and what you're doing. But yeah, that's what we, like that team there, it's the climate and energy team for the city, but they're managing the regionals, all of our ECK. But Nelson Hydro does help fund that, for Nelson Hydro customers. So absolutely take advantage of their services to help you navigate, because the rebates can be kind of complicated. So they can walk you through some of those and make sure you're getting all the things that you need to be able to get that done.
Thank you.
Do you see solar power, does that play into anything that you're doing or more?
It's not right now. So the mention of the solar garden, so we did install that in 2017. It's, customer owned panels.
No,
But the city,
Control residents, do you see it?
oh, am I seeing it happening? Yes?
Yeah, like for. There are solar panels being put on the area.
Yeah, it's not a huge number. I don't know if I have a statistic off the top of my head, but it's growing. It's been, steadily a lot more people. The Greener Homes Grant that was just discontinued earlier this year, they were putting out $5,000 for anybody installing solar on their homes. But it makes economic sense for residents to do that, because the payback is pretty good when you're comparing it to, retail energy rates of 13 cents a kilowatt hour. So, I strongly encourage if anybody's interested in that, look into it and make that investment decision. A lot of people are getting on it. It's slowly happening by not using as much energy, whether it be from, having a heat pump that uses less energy, sort of, insulating your home to use less energy, or generating your own and all these, and then sort of like offsetting your overall. That helps us all because then we don't have to buy as much power. And as I said, every time we have to buy power, that waters down the value of our generation. And you can see our growth is slowly going up. And it's gonna, we're just gonna continue to keep buying more and more, because I can't increase generation. I only have the water that I'm allocated, and we've looked at every other potentially viable option, and the cost of that investment is too high right now. Maybe in 10 years, some of these smaller little projects or things might be worthwhile from a utility perspective. But in the meantime, homeowners can absolutely take advantage of energy efficiency and installing room generation.
Don't you need sunshine to get solar to me?
We have the same solar radiance as Germany, and Germany is like all in, 25% of the entire grid is solar. Right, so it's possible. It's just not really efficient here. Much better than say Alberta or Saskatchewan, and really good in, the desert.
You can trail.
Yeah.
But BC Hydro just put out a grant, well, zero interest loan, I'm not sure which it is now, for solar or energy storage, but that would then only apply to BC Hydro customers or.
Yeah, so they've not extended that to Fortis BC or any of the municipal utilities. At this point, it might happen, but at this point, it's a BC Hydro program only, because they're the ones that are kind of charged with increasing capacity for the province. Yeah.
So there's been an increase for rural customers more than the city customers for a couple of years now.
Yeah, two.
Now this is coming this time. You're projecting a budget over 5 years. Do you continue to see greater increases for the rural customers than the urban customers over the next 5 years? And by then, how much more are we going to be paying? than the city customers.
Yeah, I don't know, like Nathan said, we haven't really, projected that out. I'm hoping that it'll, stabilize and that the rate increases will be small and similar for rural and urban, but I don't know. I know it caught me off guard a little bit, sort of, when, with the capital sort of, increasing sort of, because of Mill Street. And we're gonna continue to, add capital, as you saw the projection, we went up to 10 years with our capital. So we're gonna continue to add to the rate base over the next 10 years. So there will be some increases, for sure. It depends on inflation, like we're a little bit sort of lagging. Like if you remember in 2020, we had a 0% increase, 2021 was a 2.5 or 2.4% increase, right? You remember like inflation during those years was like really high and sort of it caught up with us in 2023, 2024. So we got 9%, 6.2, which actually got dropped to 4.1. Now we're at 7.5. So we're like, okay, hopefully we can kind of get past that hump and the inflation coming down will start to reduce the costs and the supply chain constraints that are driving those costs are gonna ease up a little bit.
Keep in mind too, though, sorry to interrupt, but again, over half of our operating expenses is forest power versus well. That is a factor beyond our control, and if they do a rate increase, that does cost us more as well. So obviously we have to pass that.
Sure, but that's 5.63 or whatever it is, but that's for 55% of your cost. That's
yeah, correct. Yeah,
3.5%.
yeah, absolutely.
And the other one I wanted to ask is the rural deferral account. That's what it's called. That's also 1 year or 2 years it's been going.
This is the
second year.
the first year that we've actually that it actually is impacting the rates.
Second, there were some deferral.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
right. We had some small ones, yeah.
Yeah, so,
But are there any guarantees in when the 5-year cycle is done, that if in fact you haven't, the utility hasn't expended those funds, that we will get credit for it? Or will the city of Nelson come up with a new reason that they need to get money out of that rural deferral account?
no, those deferral accounts are amortized over 5 years, but we see them being in existence in perpetuity. I mean,
Yes.
they're always gonna exist. And the way I look at it and the way the mechanics of how it works, it isn't a mechanism to get more money from rural ratepayers, because it goes both ways. It's a mechanism to ensure that you're paying the right amount based on actuals that we expended, as opposed to budget figures, which aren't 100% accurate. So that's the way I look at it, and the mechanics of them, that's how it works. If we overcharge you because we budgeted too high, you'll get the credit back. If we budgeted too low, we'll ask you for that to recoup that. So there's no advantage for us to budget too high, no advantage for us to budget too low. So to me, it's a correcting mechanism to ensure that you're paying the right amount.
I guess what I'm asking is, what is the important, I'm just considering the happy prospect in 5 years' time that there is a positive balance in that account. Who's watching you to make sure that the city actually?
The BCUC. The BCUC.
The Utilities Commission will look at it every year.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. I mean, there are some favorable balances in that account that we're crediting back for sure. We have 7 accounts, some are positive, some are negative. So we are crediting back, for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then maybe at some point in the future, when we do that waterfall chart, one of those things actually drops it down, right?
Yeah, I mean,
One and a half days.
Yeah, but we do know that inflation is a real thing, prices of everything go up every year, so it's, it's likely that there's, meeting like this to discuss the rate increase every year. And yeah, we'll just see what the world does, with inflation and everything else that, concerns climate change, everything.
So you mentioned that when you purchase from Fortis 5.4 kilowatt hour. When someone puts solar on their house, what do you purchase that The same 5.4?
No, so so if you put solar on your house, that person then offsets their own consumption. And the goal of residential net metering is to offset your own personal consumption. If at the end, so what we do is we'll do a calculation annually. If at the end of the year, there is a credit, like as in, you've generated more than you used, then I will only pay the additional power at the wholesale rate. So that's in our new bylaws that just got approved. So anybody who's producing more, like if someone puts in a massive solar array on their house and they generate more than what they needed in an entire year, because it averages out because of the solar cycle. So we do an average annual, but then what we'll do is like, look at that and say, okay, you've got a credit. We're gonna pay you out of that credit at the Fortis BC Terra 41 wholesale rate that we pay for all of the excess power that we purchase.
Does that apply to the solar garden as well?
Solar garden is, I mean, remember, each solar panel is an individual, like if someone bought all the solar panels, it probably would apply, but people are just getting a credit on their bill. And so it's for whatever that one single panel is producing.
What is that rate?
It's whatever you pay, so it's basically offsetting their own consumption. So it just goes on their bill, it's a credit at the rate that they are billed. So it's as though they had that one panel sitting on their house, it's exactly the same.
Storage, I mean, I assume it's a battery storage, or like, how do they manage the storage of the electricity from the solar panel?
We don't have any storage in our system. We consume all the energy that gets produced. So like that, those solar panels, like, whatever they produce just goes into the grid, and then somebody,
Like up here. we've
yeah,
got on the
yeah,
right,
it just goes into the grid.
Yeah.
And then, someone down the street is, got their stove on and they're using that power. Yeah, so electricity is gonna go like the shortest distance it can. We balance, so anytime, we're short on electricity, we buy more from Fortis. Anytime Fortis only generates 40% of its own power, so they buy 60% of their power from BC Hydro. They're in the same boat. So if they sell to us, then that means they're buying from BC Hydro. But BC Hydro has a surplus right now, and they will until 2028, possibly 2030, depending on how effective, like an energy efficiency programs are.
BC Hydro has a site C.
And BC Hydro just started the first generator in Site C, so we'll see over the next year, new generators come online, so then their capacity is gonna go up. And then they're gonna be able to, sell, right now, they're gonna be able to sell more, but by 2028, they think that we're gonna, have used up all that capacity in our own crops.
What about BC? You hear about, BC buying, importing power from the States.
Yeah, that's because they can get it cheaper. So it's all about sort of like power flows at time of day. And because BC has these huge reservoirs, so Mica, Revelstoke, and in places where they can just like fill up like the Bennett Dam, they can fill up that storage for later. So, but there's utilities in the States that are like coal-fired plants. And you can't, like, if someone turns off their stove, you can't just like, slow down a coal-fired power plant, right? They have to produce the same amount of energy, like, for 24 hours, 27, they're gonna produce something like, now, we know that, certainly Nelson Hydro's power profile, the difference between 6 PM and 3 AM is about 50%. So like, we consume only half of the amount of power at 3 AM as we do at 6 PM. So all the capacity is designed for that 6 PM because we don't want to have brownouts at supper time. So that means that something's got to turn off at 3 AM. And because we're tied to the grid, it's no problem for us. But BC Hydro ends up having to manage them. So there's times when there's too much power on the grid because these, generators, they're just running max out. So BC Hydro will actually buy, and sometimes they'll even get paid by Southern Utilities to take power. Because you can't just sort of like, You hang on to it, you gotta use it, like you generate it, it's gotta go somewhere. So they actually get paid at times or buy at really, really low rates, like less than 0.7 cents a kilowatt hour. To take electricity. And so that's why a small portion of, BC's, carbon footprint is, green, because we do take power from the states. But overall, we're a net export. Because then when the peaking is on and that, coal-fired power plant can't produce enough for their utility, we're selling it back to them at the peak power rates, which can be like really high. Like, yeah, like then like power traders will be like, hey, like California it's really hot in California right now. We want power. And somebody's like, oh, yeah, but we need power in Idaho. So they're like bartering, and power traders are, trying to get the best price. And so BC Hydro have guys that just, oh, we'll sell you power in California. Sure. Okay. We'll just, export it down to you guys at 45 cents a kilowatt hour. No problem.
You can go down this rabbit hole for, by the way, it's.
Yeah. So, I thank you so much for your time. We're out of time. If anybody wants to keep asking questions, I'll hang out here for a little bit longer. But appreciate it. Take a snack for the road. If you've got a thermos, you can take a, put some cider. Don't forget your Hydro hat, now that you're all converts, then supporting your local utility. Thank you very much. Thank you.